can't help but be nervous, uh, if not slightly scared about what's going to happen over the next year, few years, decade. I'm a parent as well, so I worry about the future of my children. Um, every day I look at the news and I seem to see more crazy stuff, whether it's to do with war, the economy, supply chains, energy prices. There's a lot of crazy shit happening all at once. And I'm hoping we're going to dig into some of this today anyway with you. What we should do though, my audience might not know you so well. So I know some people do, but we don't normally do this, but let's do a dig into your background. Just explain to everyone who you are, what it is you do, and your background that's going to make it relevant to this conversation.
Well, my name is Jeff Snyder. I work for a company recently, switched companies called Atlas Financial. So basically, I used to be a portfolio manager. I work in the financial services industry, managing money for retail clients and things like that. I also do a lot of research into the background, macroeconomics, monetary mechanics is really my specialty. Digging into the history, the plumbing, so to speak, of how the monetary system actually works, what it is the Federal Reserve or other central banks actually do, the fact that they may not actually be central banks, which is shocking for most people to hear. So basically, for the last quarter century, trying to figure out what is money and how does it work and how does it all fit together with finance and the economy.
Well, the question of what is money is a super important question because us as Bitcoiners, we believe Bitcoin is money, which I don't think you do.
No, not yet. I mean,
yet.
It's possible, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
No, we're not quite there yet. But there is a lot of discussion about what is money. A lot of people within our sector go back and talk about rice stones and glass pearls and salt and moving eventually onto gold and then paper money and then ultimately leading us to Bitcoin. But you've studied it yourself. Do you have a good answer for what is money?
No, actually, I don't.
Okay.
And I think that's the general problem. Even the Federal Reserve or central banks, economists, they can't define money either, because I think we took a step in another direction that most people aren't really aware of. Even in the progression that you just sat down and went through, went through tokens, and then paper money, then gold, and then the gold and paper money. Well, that isn't quite what happened. I think the general mistake about what happened in the Great Depression, starting there, Executive Order 6102, everybody knows, especially in Bitcoin community, yep. FDR confiscated gold, and supposedly from there we went from a sort of quasi-private money standard to a government money standard, and that's where the paper money fiat currency narrative comes in. But that's not exactly what happened. In the Great Depression, before the Great Depression, we actually had a ledger money standard that was developed in the banking system. So you had commodity money of gold coins that people could own and use as property, but you also had fractional reserve lending, which created this depository ledger type money. And even in the early 20th century, the ledger money had become the primary source of monetary exchange. Hand-to-hand currency had already started dying out in the early 20th century. So we had this quasi-hybrid where we had commodity money and more bank money, this ledger money stuff. And when FDR came along with 6102, he confiscated the private coins, the private money, but left mostly this other bank-centered ledger money system. And it wasn't exactly replaced by Federal Reserve notes because, as I said, hand-to-hand currency in most commercial, especially financial transactions, had pretty much dried up. So during the Great Depression and afterwards, it wasn't a government standard money anymore. It was a bank standard money. And as we developed in the post-war era under Bretton Woods, closer integration across economies, this bank standard money went nuclear. So it became something that we called the Eurodollar system, which is kind of what everybody associates my name with, is studying this Eurodollar system as it developed from, say, the 1950s forward, which essentially took this bank money standard, this ledger money standard, to its nth degree. Because in the Eurodollar system, there isn't even physical currency or gold or anything. It's strictly virtual, it's strictly ledger. As Bitcoiners and digital currency enthusiasts will understand distributed ledger technology. That's not something new. That's been used for decades now in this Eurodollar system. So we moved out of the Great Depression from a hybrid system to more exclusively this ledger bank money system, the government was kind of set aside there because in many ways, governments were just happy to let the banks do this outside the United States because it solved a very real problem for them, which is known as Triffin's paradox or Triffin's dilemma. So the Eurodollar system created this parallel or even superseding monetary system of its own rules, its own design, its own experimentation. And by the time you get to something like the Great Inflation, we couldn't even define money anymore because banks in this system had decades to basically experiment on different forms of transactions. And it became impossible for regulators and government authorities to even keep track of. And most of them just said, we give up. We can't even do this anymore. So in the 70s and early 80s, central banks stopped being central banks and stopped being monetary agents entirely and just said, we'll leave this to the banking system because it seems to be working very well. Once you get past the Great Inflation stuff, you get into the 80s and 90s, it's like, this seems to be working. We got globalization, we got economic growth, we got prosperity around the world. So we don't even need to define money. We don't even need to care about money. Economics as a whole just dropped monetary scholarship entirely from the 80s on forward and just kind of fingers crossed and hoped it all worked out, which, obviously we get to 2007, 2008. Something went wrong there.
Right. Well, we're going to come back to 2007, 2008. We're also going to come back to the Eurodollar because I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out what it is. And I'm going to need your explanation. But I just want to dig back into this. So for you, what should money be? What if you had to define what money should be? What would be good money? How would you define that?
Well, money isn't wealth, number one. Okay. Money is a tool, and it should be a commercial tool. It's basically to allow a modern free market capitalist economy to maximize its advantages because it allows the efficiency, allows sustainability, if we are a maximum amount of being able to price things in a stable unit of account, all the kind of things that you're familiar with. So money is a commercial tool to allow economic processes to do what they do best, allow the capitalist system, free markets to do what they do best, be most efficient, therefore sustainable. So if we start from the premise that money is a commercial tool, I think we're putting it in the right box rather than thinking about it as a financial thing or as a token of wealth or something like that.
Right, but what would make good money then?
A stable system, something that's predictable, transparent, where we all know the rules, we all know what's happening. There aren't information asymmetries. There isn't so much of it that's hidden. It's all right there, invisible. That's what made commodity money the best previous form of money because everybody understood it was property. It was it was transparent. I give you a coin, we have a transaction. We don't need to define what's going on. So it's something that's predictable, stable, and transparent, and easy to understand.
Which you've I said I would try and avoid doing this because it's not entirely your world, but you've kind of described, I think, two forms of money, really. You've described gold and Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know, kind of walked right into
Yeah,
that.
you did. Because there's this thing, it's like, why people talk about, why is Bitcoin so good? Well, it's transparent because the ledger's public.
Yes.
It's, what were the things you just listed?
Predictability, stability.
Yeah, and similar properties that gold has. And I guess when you move into the era of paper money, which can be controlled by other forces, which themselves aren't transparent, then this is where you get into issues. So that's quite interesting that you've done that. I wonder, is there a way to advance beyond gold but not get to Bitcoin and still have good money?
Sure, and I think the downside of Bitcoin isn't so much that. The transparency in the rules of the game being well known, the lack of information asymmetry are huge step forwards, huge steps in the right direction. Where I think it goes wrong is that it shares the same liabilities that some other systems have, including the gold system, which led us to Triffin's paradox, which gave us the Eurodollar system to begin with, which is inelasticity. Right. Which is, I know it's an emotional topic and it's been debated to death for generations. Do we need elastic currency? Do we not need elastic currency? Are there benefits to elasticity? Are there drawbacks to inelasticity? And the answer is it's difficult to say, but history has shown that inelastic currencies always produce some of the worst results. Volatility that leads to hoarding, deflation, depression. And so the idea of elasticity, not just in an academic sense, in a very real sense, is the idea of a currency system or a monetary system that will allow us to be transparent, predictable, and stable, but also not have that devastating downside where we lead to these periodic intermittent deflationary episodes that produces depressions, which is something we're living in right now. We're living with the consequences of an inelastic Eurodollar system that fell apart 15 years ago, almost exactly 15 years ago, and it has never been fixed. So we have an inelastic system, and we're living with the consequences. As you mentioned, it's not a coincidence. We started talking about social disorder, political chaos, war, all these other things. Those are the natural results of prolonged stagnation as a product of deflationary money.
Right. Okay. So if the properties of good money are predictability, transparency, etc., but one of the drawbacks to say gold and Bitcoin is inelasticity, which leads to volatility and hoarding, etc., which there is evidence that that does happen, of course. I mean, we literally say it in Bitcoin. We say we hodl.
Yeah.
What would then be a perfect money? What's the in between?
Something that's, I think that's really there is a happy medium here where you can't, the Eurodollar system took it to the extreme in the other direction where it was overdone, which is exactly the outcomes that Bitcoiners and hard money proponents have warned against. You don't want to go too far in the other extreme where you're just making money, creating money out of thin air for nothing and leading to all sorts of, malinvestment, as the Austrian economists say. Because that's exactly what happened in the 1990s and middle 2000s, is that the currency system, the monetary system, went way too far in the other direction. And so that's sort of an argument not for strict currency or fixed-based currency, but somewhere in the middle. Can we have a predictable, stable, transparent currency that is in some ways like Bitcoin, but still elastic enough that it doesn't lead to one extreme or the other? So we're trying to find a happy medium here. And, it's easy to talk about in ideal circumstances, and it's very difficult in terms of practice. But I think, at least from a theoretical perspective, that's where we need to be moving toward, is a happy medium between, one extreme and the other, because both extremes are bad.
Well, no, I'm following you. And Danny, I'm going to say something that will be not particularly popular with Bitcoiners, because 21 million fixed cap, that is an immovable force. That is one of the fundamental pillars of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, whilst is considered money by some, it's also considered a store of wealth. If there was a form of Bitcoin which was elastic, therefore there was no incentive to hoard, the incentive would be to use it as that tool.
Right.
And hopefully have stable pricing, which I'm going to come back to because I've got a question on that. So if you had a currency like Bitcoin, which was elastic, which allowed people to use it as a tool and not hoard it, then where would you store wealth? You clearly need the tool of money, which allows for the division of labor and the economy to function, but people also want to store the wealth, the earnings, the capital they've made, and save for a future. Do you need two separate tools?
I think so, and I think that's the most elegant solution, to split money from its three functions. I think you can combine the medium of exchange with unit account. Those two go together really well. And then store of value is really something of a different animal. And I think for a long time, gold filled that role because there really wasn't anything else. But over the last 2 centuries, we've had financial markets develop, liquid financial markets, that have taken on the role of store of value. Now, whether or not they're, whether they're ideal or not is a completely separate argument, but that's exactly what's happened. In fact, the Eurodollar system, the portfolio that performs in one economic regime can get crushed in the next. So in this free webinar, we're going to reveal what those 4 economic regimes are, how to identify them, as well as the assets, historically speaking, best positioned to perform in every environment. So reserve your seat now and learn how to prepare your portfolio before the economy shifts again.